look at some of the isms and schisms and challenges and all, you would think that we'd always be able to be at peace with each other, right? Because we all think alike. We all see things the same way. We all have the same understanding of everything, right?
We're one body.
We're one body. It's perfect, yeah. Unity of the Spirit. That's why it says maintain the unity of the Spirit. God already knew we weren't going to be able to do it. So we have to work hard at it. Have you ever thought about that? We have to work hard at maintaining something that we all believe. It's kind of unusual. But we're going to find out, as Jason alluded last week, that the changes in the Roman Empire coming, being Christian, quote unquote, have huge ramifications. And those ramifications actually turn it into violence we're going to look at this morning. And this morning we're going to look at the first of some of the isms and schisms, but this one is directly associated with this change in favor from persecution of Christianity to favoring Christianity. And there's a lot more to it, as always. Everything's not simple, and even what we're going to talk about this morning is just the simplified version of a complex situation. But we're going to be talking about what's referred to as the Donatist heresy or reaction or whatever. And it's the hard part about it is you say, well, are they heretics doctrinally? Well, they believed in the same Lord. They had the same faith. They, had the same stuff. But their practice of how they did stuff shifted, challenged authority, etc. And some of the conclusions they came to also changed the way things were practiced. Now, the reason this is a significant one is because it lasted till basically the Islamic overtaking of North Africa. As you'll find out at the end of the lesson, the reason it finally went away is most of them were dead. When you all die, usually there's not too many people carrying on your movement. Up until that time, this was very strong. So we're going from the early 300s to the mid 600s. Okay, that's over 300 years. The U.S., 1776, 2016. Go all the way back to the Pilgrims, 1620. I mean, it's like a movement started then and finally ended just recently. That's how long this lasts and how all of these things impact the church, authority, who's in charge. And so this movement is very, very significant. It also is the demonstration of some of the first violence. We see this today, don't we? People get so passionate about something, they choose to believe that violence is an acceptable solution. Well, we're going to see some of that in the interaction here. So this schism, and that's why we're calling it a schism versus a heresy. Okay? A heresy would be, there's a doctrinal problem. This could also be a heresy in the sense of a separate choice. But by this time, 3rd century, that word, remember we talked about that a few weeks ago, that word becomes very much associated with doctrinal variance, not just practice variance. So that's why we're going to call this a schism. In other words, a division between the way things are done. And now, of course, there are some doctrinal issues that do come up, and it's quite interesting. Not too difficult to work through, but quite interesting. Now, we have mentioned multiple times about the lapsed, in other words, those who under persecution gave way to and did something, and of varying forms and degrees, everything from running away to offering sacrifices, to faking offering sacrifices, to purchasing false certificates, to you name it. There's this whole big wide range of things that quote-unquote people gave into. Well, what did we see just before Constantine takes over? One of the largest persecutions ever under Diocletian, and Jason did a really good job of explaining all that kind of stuff. The challenge that's interesting about this, though, is In the earlier times, those who stood firm in the faith, or what were referred to as confessors, in other words, they stood firm, imprisonment, torture, whatever, even to martyrdom, they were called confessors. They were very, very much more willing to say, hey, we know how tough it was. It was hard for us. Come on back in the church, all those who lapsed or failed. Okay? That was in the 2nd century. And of course, that was a challenge of the confessors saying, hey, come on back in, and the church authority going, hey, wait a second, we need to do this. And we had that conflict between the confessors and the church authorities. Well, here we see the same problem, except the roles flip. Those who are the confessors during this Diocletian time, and in particular in North Africa, where this whole movement begins, they are way, way tougher this time than the church. So it's kind of funny. The church leaders are sort of sitting here, and earlier the confessors are over here being easier, and now they're over here being a lot tougher. And it doesn't matter whether they're tougher, easier, or the same. It matters who's in charge and who makes the decision, right? You can still agree with somebody and they still have the wrong approach to it. Well, that's why it becomes a schism, because one group goes, this is the way it needs to be done, and the other group says, no, that's not. And of course, we're going to get the beginning of the continuing, never-ending saga of bishop, who is the bishop? Or pope, who is the pope? I mean, later on, we're going to see like 5 and 6 popes running around at the same time. I mean, it's amazing what happens, right? But we see that today. We see those same type of issues today. So it's nothing new under the sun, but we're going to see how this plays out. Now, basically, what we have is the persecution under Diocletian, and it was particularly intense in North Africa. Okay, the city of Carthage was the major Roman city there. The Romans had taken over Carthage from the Carthaginians, and that was, if you remember, good old Hannibal and brought his elephants across the Alps and all that kind of stuff, if you're a military history person. Well, that was the final defeating of the Carthaginians, all those guys. And Rome basically takes over Carthage. And it becomes a hub of commerce and trade and agriculture of North Africa. What's interesting about it today is if you looked at Carthage today, you'd be like, they grew stuff here? You've got to be kidding me. I mean, it is like arid desert sands blowing into the city. Global warming, yes, started back, right after way a long time ago. Desertification of the Sahara and things like that have been going on, and Carthage is now really, really, really bad. But at that time, it was a port city. It was very important. There was tons of agriculture around those regions, and therefore, who do you think is going to be the biggest consumer of agricultural produce that Carthage might trade with? Who? Rome. Yeah. Rome is going to be the big trade partner. And if you remember, we talked about North Africa was also the place where they were more Roman than Greek, more Latin. Remember, we saw that some of the first Latin fathers they were in Carthage. Okay, and these particular areas are going to be much more tied to Rome than Constantinople. And guess what happens after Constantine becomes emperor? What does he do? He moves the seat of power from Rome to Constantinople. So you've got some political shifting going on, but you have some economic stuff going on between Rome and Carthage. That's important. I'm going to come back to that, but that's important to set the stage that this is going to be a lot more complicated than, okay, we just disagreed on a couple of points of doctrine, or we didn't like this guy type of stuff. There's a lot more that goes on to it. Now, what's interesting is during this time of persecution, there were people who, they gave in, they worshiped, they did all sorts of stuff. There were other people who ran. There were other people who hid. There were other people who turned over Scripture. There were other people who turned over stuff that looked like it was Scripture, but if you didn't know the difference, you wouldn't know that it was. There were people who listed stuff that says, here's what we use in worship, and here's the stuff we have associated with our church. Which ones are the bad ones? Which ones are the good ones? Well, what ends up happening is the more rigorous people in this particular area go and say, you guys turned over your scriptures. You are traditores, or traitors in modern language. You are the betrayers because, you didn't give up your faith, you didn't run, you didn't do anything, but you gave up God's word. So you're just as big a traitor to the faith as anybody.
Sorry for maybe an obvious question. Giving up God's word to whom?
To the authorities, to the people who are persecuting under Diocletian. So they were giving up the scriptures to the authorities who were persecuting. So in other words, it basically, and think about it this way, this church has one Bible. And the elder board decided we're giving it to the government and they're going to shred it. And that's our only copy. Okay, that would be much like the equivalent here. Now, it's not like us, which room am I in and what version of which Bible do I want to pull off what shelf or bookshelf, It's not like that. We all have access to it. So to give up a copy, and it's a lot of material. Remember, handwritten, papyrus type of stuff. That's a lot of stuff. That's very expensive. So again, it's not just, okay, sure, I gave you your 49-cent copy of the New Testament and with plus Psalms. I mean, it's nothing like that. This is like treasure you're giving up. So that's why they said these guys are traitors. Now, they didn't deny their faith. They didn't run. They didn't back down, but they did give their Bible. And so people said, oh, well, that's just as bad. So if you notice here, it's a complicated question. It's a challenging thing because we've seen through all the times of persecution, did you run? Are you bad? Did you give up? This same problem comes. But the persecution was particularly horrible in North Africa, in the Carthage area. Now, what's interesting about this, and this is where this whole split comes, and we're going to come back to some of the stuff I was just talking about in a little bit. You end up with the bishop of Carthage dies. Okay? And so what do? They elect a new bishop. Well, there were multiple people put forth. It's kind of interesting. Multiple bishops put forth. And the first one was a guy named, and I'm gonna pronounce it the way I'm pronouncing, Cecilian. Okay? I'm hoping that's like Caesar, Cecilian. Hopefully that's the proper way. It's not Caecilian. I don't know. Not good with Latin, anglicized, but I'm going to say Sicilian. Not Sicilian, but Sicilian. And he has a rival, a guy named Margarinus, and these guys were rivals. Well, Sicilian was the more moderate, we'll call a mainline church kind of guy, and Majorinus was the more rigorous. His supporters were more rigorous. Sicilian drew most of his support, not all, most of his support around Carthage and proconsular North Africa, and that was the people who, oh, by the way, we're going to hear, benefited more from this trade from Rome, and Margarinus pulled more of his support from the rural and more countryside. Now, that's not saying that's exclusive, it's just statistical, okay? Because there would be people in the country that would support one guy and people in the city who support the other guy. But that's just sort of also helps up your socioeconomic differentiation here. City guys and country guys kind of stuff.
How much did either of these guys get, support from the Bishop of Rome, from the church at large?
How much? Well, we're going to talk about how much support each of them got. What's going to happen is these two guys are put forth. And let's just say the mudslinging in our current presidential election is nothing new under the sun. This was parlor tricks and lying, cheating, stealing, whatever. Let's just say it was not what you would call a nice Christian election. All right, so don't be fooled to think that, oh, they're all believers, so everything's going to be done nice and friendly. No, it was nasty. Both parties, both groups, both candidates, if you will, for this position have ample reason, based on the documents that we have today, ample reason to say you cheated, you lied, you stole the election, whatever. But, quote unquote, Sicilian supposedly won, and of course the other party said, no, you didn't. So now you have two bishops in Carthage. Now, what is going to be one of the implications of Rome, of Constantine becoming Christian? What's going to be one of the implications of that? It's not happening yet. Okay, hasn't happened yet, but there are going to be political implications. Remember, Jason talked about that church-state, melding. We're going to see that this debate is going to move out of the local church realm to the larger church realm, to the empire realm. It's going to have significant impact. At this point, it's a local issue. All right?
But Constantine considered himself bishop of bishops.
Yeah, Constantine considered himself the bishop of bishops.
So this, to him, is a hierarchical issue that he's got to take care of.
Yeah, he's going to have to take care of it. That's the way he's looking at it. Now, remember, at this point, this is just after the persecutions. We're going to see this develop. So this isn't just all of this happened this week, next week, there was a vote online and we did it. This is a over years time period that's going to happen. Now, the thing that was interesting is Margarinus dies shortly after. And you say, oh, good. Problem solved. Opposition leader dead. Sicilian's in charge. Everything's cool. You think that's going to happen. You would hope that was going to happen. It doesn't happen. That's where you end up with another gentleman named Donatus of Sesse Nigre. He was from Numidia, which is just to the west of the Carthage. So it's along the coast and then sort of inland, and it is to the west of Carthage. By the way, Carthage is in modern-day Tunisia. Okay, so Donatus becomes the leader of this opposition group, and he leads this group for nearly 50 years. Thus, the group's party name becomes the Donatists, even though he wasn't the initial leader. But he led it for so long. So this is why it's called Donatism. The problem that you get is if you have an election and you get one guy and you have a challenge and that person dies, then you have a challenger challenging again, how does that look to the unity of the church? Not good. And therefore, a lot of these other bishops, a lot of the leading ministers of the region kind of go, this isn't good. We need to help. And how many people love outside help? Right? We have a problem here. We're going to go help you. Well, the church, of course, trying to maintain unity and resolve issues and, fighting for the faith, all good stuff. Unfortunately, if you're in opposition and you get ruled against, how much do you like that interference? You don't like it at all. Because you're like, hey, wait a second, this is our local thing, this is our local issue, and therefore the locals should solve this problem. Well, there's a bunch of different little councils and things that go on, but most of the bishops in Rome, Rome has trade with Carthage, and Sicilian is from that area and is more associative with those people. And of course, you're looking at it, hey, we're the poor, ignorant peasants here. We're from the sticks, and you guys are powerful, wealthy people ruling against us. Doesn't go over well. And this is where that socioeconomic, political, religious stuff starts all mixing together.
But also, in Sicilian's defense, he was elected the right way.
Yeah, he was
church in the right manner.
He was elected the proper way.
And then Donatus came up kind of as a second
Yes, yeah.
And so Donatus was the challenger. So Rome had to say, and Constantine will have to say, he's the right guy because he was legitimately elected.
Oh yeah,
That's the end of the matter, of course not.
yeah, that's the challenge. Right or wrong, it still creates a problem. If you notice here, right doesn't necessarily mean things and problems go away. And we are going to see this whole thing play out. And that's why this is not one instantaneous thing. It's not just one instantaneous point of issue. It's not, life is much more complicated. Okay? This is just a beautiful example of how complicated and messy it gets. And the impacts of all of these things that we've been talking about. Remember, a couple lessons ago I said this is the turning point in the church. Massive turning point for over 1,000 years of impact because of these events. Here's one of them. Do you have the right to challenge what the rest of the church and the leaders and the elders and other bishops and other leaders say? And of course, the Donatists say, yes, because this guy's crummy and they stole the election and they have enough validity behind it to question it. And yet, Cecilian was elected. What happens when you get bad elders or bad pastors? The U.S., it's real easy. You say, see ya, and you leave. Unless you live in a small town, you don't have any place to go to, or you have no other church to go to. See, we've already schismed ourselves, so there's lots of choices of which level of schism you want to go to, right? There's so many variables that are available. At this point, there wasn't. Remember, Marcion is still floating around, though his church is sort of beginning to dwindle out at this point. But you don't have a lot of options. Therefore, unity is very important. The church wants to maintain unity. And who else is going to want to maintain unity in the empire? Constantine, yeah, the emperor. And remember, at this particular point, he is just sort of one of the Caesars. He hasn't become an Augustus yet on the western side. So these guys are under his influence. Eventually, he gets it all.
And he was also pretty wise in understanding how religion formed that base for society. And so he didn't want schisms because he knew that would just divide his power base. So he really wanted one.
Yeah, he wants one unified people with one unified faith. Yeah. So there's validity to that, right? The more homogeneous a society you have, the easier it is to work together. The more diverse society you have, the tougher it is to work together. Just by the varieties of cultures and languages and all that kind of stuff. It just is. It's cool, it's rich, it's amazing, but it also is tough. So, what we end up here is eventually, and again, I'm moving ahead and I'm going to come sort of sweep back again. Eventually, once Constantine gets in power and these guys have brought forth the difficulties and the issues, Constantine steps in and says, wait a second. Cecilian is the guy. Donatist and all of you guys, we love you, but you can't keep fighting this. If you want to maintain your privileges as clergy and tax exemptions and whatever other benefits you have under, now that you're okay, you need to reunite with Cecilian and stop challenging this. And stop acting as a separate bishop, and stop opposing the positions. And if you don't, my local government officials are going to take away everything and declare you guys illegitimate. So now you have the government, the emperor, stepping into this dispute and saying, we have no problem with you as long as you maintain unity. If you don't maintain unity, here are the consequences. Well, if you're somebody who rigorously thinks that you've been cheated, you think that the church is going off in the wrong direction, you think there's issues here, and then the government steps in, regardless if it's Constantine or not, you have two choices. You either give in or you lose your privilege and press on. Well, what do you think the Donatists did? Being what I already told you, that they last for about 300 years.
They pressed on.
They pressed on. They left. They said, sorry, we don't care. Oh, that makes Constantine feel good. That makes the local church feel good. That makes everybody feel really good. Now people are going, I don't care what you say. I don't care what the emperor says. I don't care what the bishops say. I don't care what other bishops say. I don't care what the election is. We're going to go do our own thing. And who's going to stop them? Okay, unless you break a law. They can take your tax exemption away, which they did. They can take the privilege away, which they did. They can take all the benefits away, which they did. We won't build your churches for you. And they stopped. And they just went, we're pressing on.
I think the tax exempt thing is so interesting.
Tax exemption?
Started way back in.
Oh, yeah.
And it's an issue today.
Yeah, tax exemption for religious and nonprofit organizations. Yeah.
Interesting thing.
It is. It is. It's quite interesting. It's always there. Now, here's the theologic thing, though, that was brought up. And this is a very interesting thing theologically. Because this is the charge that the Donatists lay at the feet of Caecilian. As a matter of fact, and this is why the larger church starts stepping in, because they keep going, whoa, 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 whoa. If we let this charge stick, we got a real problem. And the charge was Caecilian was ordained by a bishop that they considered a traitor for handing over Scripture. Okay, and their logic is, well, if this guy's a traitor, it's not like he's a heretic, but he's a traitor. See how the words and languages shift of what is or isn't good or bad or whatever. This guy's not he's a heretic from a doctrinal perspective. It's not like he doesn't believe in God or Jesus and salvation. He didn't. None of that. He was a traitor. And it wasn't even Caecilian. It was the guy who ordained him. And so therefore, Caecilian's ordination is invalid. And anybody he ordains or baptizes, that's invalid. And anything he teaches is invalid. Any edict he has is invalid. Not necessarily wrong, but invalid. Yeah, see, there's a difference.
So other than encouraging people not to like what he says and does, like what does that mean like, in a practical sense?
Well, what's going to happen in a practical sense is, therefore, he cannot be the bishop, and his election as bishop is invalid because he's not a real bishop, so he can't be elected as the principal guy.
But the practicality is what you're talking about, baptism.
Yeah, it's now going to affect, because if you carry, it starts off with the argument of he himself, because this is the argument. But once you do that, now anything he does, okay, you were baptized. Well, what was one of the key things that you had to have communion in the church at this time? Got to have you baptized. Well, if you're not baptized, you're not in the church. If you're not in the church, then you got a problem here. And you can't move forward. So again, all these little things we've talked about that start off innocuous and start coming into play. And so fundamentally what ends up happening is, this is where the rest of the church steps in and goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. You mean that you guys think that anybody you think that was not quote unquote perfect, effectively, anything they did, say, elect, etc., baptize, give communion, etc., is not valid? How does anybody know anybody's heart? So you could say, well, that person looks really good, but how do I know that I was baptized and my baptism is valid? Quote unquote. Now, of course, this ignores the scriptures, but this is the argument, right?
So, does that make sense, Sean?
Yeah.
Remember, originally baptism was a sign that you were really a believer at a time where being a believer was illegal, so you didn't want to let anybody into the church.
Yeah.
Now it's become, you have to be baptized if you want to be part of the church, if you want to be saved.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of
It starts moving that. Plus the Apostles' Creed. That's why they started that, because remember all of the Gnostic type of stuff. That's why they had the Apostles' Creed, and that's was used in baptism. Okay, well, see what happens here? Suddenly the entire structure of the church, your entire understanding of salvation or not, because again, it starts slow, it starts creeping, because see how slippery we've already stepped away from the scriptures? We're not even talking, everything I'm talking about has nothing to do with the scriptures. This starts playing legal wrangling. and definitions and terms. And guess what ends up happening over time? It becomes canon law from the church. Has nothing to do with the scriptures. Oh, wait a second, there's this Reformation thing that says, hey, why don't we go look at the scriptures again? Starting here. You're already seeing it. Cindy?
Where are the scriptures? Have they been recovered through the monastic movement and
Oh, the scriptures they haven't been lost here. They're totally...
they're back in the church centers?
Oh, they've never been lost yet. The recovery that Jason was talking about is in the 9th, 10th, and 11th centuries.
Yeah, not to the degree that it's a downhill spiral.
Yeah.
You're still at the top.
Yeah, we're still at the top right now.
The traitors gave the scriptures.
There's still copies. Yeah, there's still copies around.
To me, that's a fascinating thread through this of where scriptures are.
Yeah, well, the scriptures are there. It's just different churches or different people. Maybe they had a Gospel of John they gave away, It's not like the scriptures vanished from North Africa. It's just there are certain people who gave scriptures away. They considered that as abandoning the faith. So all of this invalidates everything.
At this time, what we're talking about is there's 1,000 things going on in the church.
Yeah.
Right? We've got the impact of Constantine. You've got this schismatic reaction. You've got the people moving out to the desert. We'll talk about Athanasius and Ambrose and some
Yeah.
guys, which you'll like a lot more.
Yeah.
These guys are scriptural.
Yeah.
So you're going to find that, it's not the whole church was just absorbed just this one thing. There's
Yeah.
actually a number of things going on. And at this point, the scriptures, some of them have been turned over, but a lot of them are still in play.
Yeah.
And so you'll see that coming back.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. It takes a while before the scriptures actually kind of wander off the scene.
This is where systematic theology starts to be overrun actual theology.
Yeah.
Because now things like the Apostles' Creed and baptism as a means and apostolic authority, which was all used to defeat heresy in the past, has now become the rule of thumb.
Yeah.
As opposed to supporting
Yeah.
the scriptures.
So we see the good tools that were used against heresy turned into bad tools to deal with schisms. And so what we're seeing here, if you notice, everybody's confused, right? Because we're getting all these questions. Well, what do you think is happening in the countryside and in the cities and the rumor mill and whatever, Oh, well, I heard this. Oh, I heard that. Well, wait a second. This guy's, a bad guy. This because if he did this. And, did you know your baptism's invalid, Laura? Because, that evil Jason did it because he was ordained by this guy who was, So, are you even saved? It's crazy what happens. And these are issues that come along.
The life of Brian, where they're all sitting there. Are you the people's front of Judea? We're the Judean people's front.
Yeah.
Where's the people from Judea? He's over there. Splitter!
Yeah. All these guys end up in these challenges. Now, what's the practical effect? Well, if you are a non-Donatist, if you're a Sicilian person, and the Donatists convince you that you need to, that they're right, what are the Donatists going to require of you? Rebaptism. You're going to have to be baptized again because, see, under the Sicilians people, your baptism isn't valid. Now, if you're a Donatist and you go, Sicilians group isn't quite so bad, and I think Donatism's getting a little bit off here because we're going to see the Circumcellians who get really off. You come over there and they're going to say, welcome. You don't need to be baptized. You were baptized. And so what really comes out of this is there's a doctrinal decision, if you will, from a practical effect, that the church, through councils and writings and whatever kind of stuff, basically said, it does not matter the worthiness of the person who performed the thing, the baptism, communion, whatever. It matters your heart and that you did it. I'm glad they decided that, because can you imagine? It means you'd just be tracing lineages and we'd be playing Ancestry.com back through, okay, did this guy, and let's search their life and see what horrible things they did. Oh no, they're invalid. And okay, then here's all the people that...
None of us be worthy.
Yeah, none of us be worthy. And that was the whole problem, is that's why the church said, whoa. You guys are out of bounds here. This does not match Scripture. This does not match any precedent. You are making this up. Okay, does that make sense? So this was some of the initial stuff. The problem is the underlying, if you will, mantra that the Donatists kept saying is, we need purity in the church. And see, these guys weren't pure. We need pure teachers, and we need pure leaders, and we need pure this. Sounds familiar? Let's purify it all, right? And so you have a little problem when one of the early leaders of the Donatists happened to have killed 2 of his nephews. No problem. But he was one of the early leaders. You're like, purity in the church, and this is your leader? Murdered, not accidental thing, run him over with a donkey cart. I mean, killed them. And so there was plenty of tainted water, if you will, on both sides. So the argument of purity sounds good, but in practice, when you look at both sides, there was not purity on either side. Okay? But one side's using the great word of purity to be see, we need to purify this stuff. Whenever you start hearing those words, be very afraid. They're biblical, but very rarely are they used biblically.
So it was the Donatists that were saying this?
The Donatists were saying, we need to purify, we need to be tougher, we need to be more rigorous. That's why they said, this guy's a bad guy, he was ordained by a bad guy, therefore anything he does is a bad thing. It's just be very careful about that. Yes, we want to be pure, but if that becomes the watchword of a movement, purity, usually there's something else going on. I'm not going to say that there wasn't some good intention. I mean, these are believers here, guys. I'm not telling you that these guys are heretics denying the Lord or anything else. These are believers. But look how challenging it is right now. We haven't got to the bad parts yet.
And the leaders that are being elected aren't necessarily great guys.
Yeah.
So it's hard not to have some sympathy for the Donatists at this point.
Yeah.
Because some of the guys that we're going to look at, the main figures, not all of them, but the main figures aren't really necessarily all that great.
Yeah.
And so it's hard not to say, maybe the Donatists had a point that this guy really ought to be opposed.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of issues going on. And another thing too, I mean, think about Timmy's question. It's not that, everybody was so in line with the bishop that everybody was like this. I mean,
Yeah.
there were pockets, and the local churches still had much more influence than the main church. So that's why the scriptures still survive. That's why there's still legitimate believers with legitimate doctrine and hearts for the Lord.
Yeah.
So even though you start seeing the leadership go astray, I mean, obviously enough people stayed true to the word that it got to Martin Luther.
Yeah. No, that's something that's very important. The reason God set up the church as a local church, even though we want to work together, is because he knew this stuff was coming. Because once one group starts dominating, then you got a problem. This is why, we believe in a local church. If we screw up and we blow up and we do dumb things, well, there's 5 others down the street that aren't. Or if the 5 others down the street go the wrong way, we're still here. And these are going to be challenges. And they're real challenges. Try to maintain unity, try to be similar, try to present a united front, and yet there's cracks all over the place. So you see, this is a challenging thing. That's why this is a schism, not heresy. Subtle, isn't it? How many different kinds of Baptists are there? We've run out of alphabet letters and words in the dictionary. And I grew up Baptist, so I can say that.
I was reading about John Bunyan yesterday, and he was considered a Baptist, but there's almost a paragraph of biography of him that had to explain what he meant by being a Baptist.
What he meant by being a Baptist.
So many different versions of it.
Yeah. How many different Lutherans are there? How many different Presbyterians are there? How many different Methodists are there? How many different Anglicans, Episcopal? I mean, you name it. There's flavors and varieties all over the place of everything. And then you find out that the United Methodist guy over here works with the OPC guy over here because they actually have the same doctrine, but their churches are, you're like, how'd that happen? It's crazy. This is, however, what happens when we get our culture, our politics, our economics, and then our government in the middle of it. Because what happens is Constantine steps in. He's going to straighten it out. And the Donatists do not back down. And some of them get to the point where they are not real happy. And they get so unhappy in the countryside, a subset group around 340, so again, this is just after Constantine, 340 form called the Circumcellions. Okay, we're not sure exactly where that came from, the name. You would think maybe that was like from circumcision or something, but it isn't. Most scholars tend to point to this. They think that they had headquarters near graveyards. And you're like, I'm not even going to try to go why that, but these guys were much more of the common folk, agrarian society outside the city, not all of them. And a lot of people will point at them and say, oh, these are just bandits masquerading under religious guise. But most scholars look at them and say these guys were the equivalent of the zealot party in Judaism. You know, the guys that Masada and slit their throats and, you know, all that kind of stuff. That's the kind of fanaticism the Circumcellions had. Now, here's an interesting little thing that goes along with that is if you can't be a martyr anymore because the government's Christian, what's the next best thing to show how passionate you are for the Lord? To martyr against error. There you go. We're so fed up with this church, we're going to commit mass suicide jumping off a cliff. They actually did that. We are so for God over you weak people, you moderate people who really don't get it. We're going to make sure you get it. And we'll beat you up. We'll tear up your house. We'll do anything to make sure you get it. Yikes. Now, were all the Donatists Circumcellions? Absolutely not. This is a small subset. But when it becomes a violent small subset, like any movement, extremism creeps in. Arguing for God's love is a great thing. When you take it to an extreme, what happens? God is a big fluffy grandpa with kids sitting on his lap with handing them marshmallows and s'mores and whatever, and there's no judgment, right? Or God will punish evil and sin, and eventually all he is this big ogre sitting there smashing people for the fun of it, right? Well, this is what happens. These guys are so pure and so holy and so want to make sure things are done so well, they'll go to any extreme to prove it and make it happen. They become the Circumcellions. Now, some of the Donatist leaders went, whoa, 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 whoa. That ain't what we're talking about here. We just want some purity. So again, like Jason said, there's some guys that are in there that are pretty good and solid, and they have legitimate gripes. But if you need a few shock troops to sort of loosen up the people's minds, maybe these guys aren't so bad. They got a little out of hand. Go get them, boys. And it got to the point where if you were a wealthy person with your country villa and your estate out there, you couldn't go anywhere without armed guards. Significant armed guards. And over time, the Roman government is going to say, you can be whatever you want to be, guys, to stop making a mess with Rome or Constantinople. And what is going to happen when you can't travel the roads, you can't bring produce in, you can't trade, money starts falling, the economic viability of Rome itself is being threatened because of the agricultural trade between North Africa through Carthage to Rome. What do you think they're going to do? What would you do? You're not Christians now, you're the Roman government, caring about the Roman Empire, or the Constantinople government, whatever you want to call it. What are you going to do? Kill the opposition. You're going to go in and strongly recommend, with a couple of legions or two, that you guys stop this. What's interesting about it is as Rome went in there and tried to stop all this stuff, they didn't, and they couldn't. Many of these people did not like Rome. Many of these people kept their own language and their own culture, and they felt Rome was opposing. And if you already disagree with it, with the church, you see that the church is using Rome to oppress. Remember Jason talked about last week that, we declare them a heretic, but we can't kill them. Hey, government, can you kill them? Well, that's what you're getting here. We can't deal with the doctrinal stuff, and nobody's changing. But by the way, you're interfering with the Roman Empire, so Rome is going to come in and do something about it.
Sounds like Jesus.
What's that?
I mean, it sounds like crucify Jesus.
Yeah, crucify Jesus. Well, yeah,
He's interfering with you.
he's interfering with you. Yeah, same type of thing. Just like at Paul. Remember the guy in Ephesus? You guys calm down because we don't want the Romans to come in here. The Romans said, I don't care. Go ahead, beat them up. Just don't mess with Rome. Same policies. But you guys are messing with Rome. So we don't care what you believe. You're messing with Rome. So we're going to come in and do something. They failed. The Vandals come in later. We're going to talk about that with Augustine of Hippo and all 410. You know, the Vandals are at the gates of Hippo when Augustine dies. The Vandals come in. They fail. The only people who succeed in wiping out Donatism are the Muslims because they kill them. That's a simple solution. You don't negotiate. You did not convert. You're dead. So the movement pretty much dies out. That's when it dies out. Literally died out. That's how long it took. That's how strong this was. That's how much impact. And yet, all of these issues, they still keep coming back to the government and saying, hey, side with us. Right? If the government's involved in making decisions that are religious, they keep coming back. And we're going to see with Athanasius, we're going to see with the Arius, we're going to see with all these other people, that's what the people start doing. And what's going to happen, just moving forward here in time a little bit, what is going to happen when being near the emperor's ear or significant proconsulars or whatever becomes really important? What's going to happen when church and state are like this and the senior religious leaders are right next to the senior government leaders? What is going to happen within the church? The church is going to be fighting for my doctrinal position to get next to and get elected to the position against or next to the influencer. So if I have a rival I don't like, I can appeal to the government to declare it anathema or accursed or send away or put levy on them or whatever. That's what ends up happening. We're going to see the fight between Antioch and Alexandria. We're going to see all sorts of things. When we see Athanasius, he's going to be welcomed and then hated, and then welcomed and then hated depending on who's in power. It's amazing. This is the beginning of that kind of stuff. Remember we said that there's the good side. Christianity's open and able to share the gospel and go about and do things, and there's all this help. Well, there's also the downside of it here. How would you like to be on the Donatist side? As Jesus said, hey, some of these guys were not good people, and yes, they may have done some issues here, and then the government comes in and says, sorry, you're wrong. The government, not the church. The church did too, but it gets really squishy really, really fast. And so, you seeing how big a turning point this is? Did we talk about any of this early on? Not much. Of course, if you read the book of Acts, you'll see that there was debates and discussions and differences within the church right at the beginning. This one is just on an empire-wide scale, and the ramifications long-term are dramatic. Let's see, anything else? Nope. Okay. Any quick questions? Or does this make sense? Yeah.
What exactly do the Donatists believe? Do they have any kind of creed, or is there a way to summarize it?
The Donatists were just they just didn't agree with the way the Lapps were coming in, and therefore from that point it then becomes the debate of who's in charge and why are they in charge, and then to get to that charge you have to come up with a theologic debate, and so unfortunately they start running away from Scripture into logic and law and whatever to create the problems. And then some of the Circumcellians, I mean, they really legitimately believe that the most honorable thing to do is fight against heresy to the point of death, even martyrdom. And if I can't be martyred, I'll martyr myself. I mean, that's just, we've walked off the path a long time ago when we're talking about that kind of stuff. But there's nothing specific that at least I know of that was some doctrinal variance. Again, these are people who claim to be believers. Now, what happens when you're poorly taught? You go off really easy. What happens when you're overly taught? You go off, yeah. Right. If it's all head knowledge and there's no heart knowledge to it, you got a problem. If it's all about my emotions and passions and what I feel without any knowledge, you got a problem. That's why we try to keep this. This is church history, boring stuff. But you see how applicable it is? That's our point of teaching it. We've been down these paths before. Let's not go down them again. It's too easy. And it's way more complicated than even what I've described here this morning. Because there's a million different people and a million different pictures and millions of different reasons. As many as people in this room, there's that many variances and subtleties. That's why we have to keep back and hold to the essentials and practice them well and keep to them and stop asking ourselves, how do I feel about this? Because you might feel really badly about it. It's what does God's Word say? How should I practice Christian charity? How do I need to defend the faith? Charity and defense. How do I deal with those things? This is where it goes if you don't ask those questions. You get yourself into trouble. And that's why we want to help everybody grow up into who? Looking like me? No. Looking like Christ. And hopefully I and the rest of you here can say, look at me, be imitators of me as I am also of Christ. Because that's why God gives us people to look to. Not that they're perfect, but they should be emulating the Lord. And as much as I do that, follow. As much as I don't do that, run away. No, lovingly come and tell me, please. Because anybody with a heart wants to know God and wants to know if they're off somewhere or said something that was offensive or anything like that. That's what you want. If you don't want that, then you got a problem. Okay? Then you really need to examine where you are. And some of these guys were good. Some of these guys were bad. Some of these people were wheat. Some of them were tares. Some of them were well-educated. Some of them were not educated. Some of them did the right things for the wrong reasons, and some of them did the wrong things for the right reasons. So let's stay with the Scriptures. Let's stay with what we know. Let's keep helping each other walk this path because it's too hard alone. If you get out there on your own, you got a problem, and you're going to have a